Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome back to another episode of News Dose, where I keep you up to date with all of the latest gaming news. And today we have a lot of Xbox related content to talk about because head of Xbox Phil Spencer did have an interview on IGN's Unlocked last night. It was a pretty good interview, and I personally always really love listening to Phil Spencer, and well, there is a lot to go over here as Phil Spencer talked about the price, the launch, and how the Series X compares to the PlayStation 5, the likelihood of more Nintendo games on Xbox, and more. So I'm going to try and talk a little bit about all of these topics, and because Phil Spencer was careful with his wording, we do have to read between the lines on a lot of this stuff, but I do think that we can gather a lot from this interview, so we're going to go over all of that. Now, of course, there is more to talk about as well because I do cover the entire industry, so let's go over some of the quick stuff first, and then we'll go and take a deep dive into the Phil Spencer interview. To start things off though, a new game was announced yesterday by the name of Mortal Shell, and it actually looks really good. Now, Mortal Shell is an action RPG developed by a brand new studio called Symmetry, and it looks like it may have a bit of a Dark Souls influence, and I know that's such a cliche thing to say by this point because it almost feels like every game has some Dark Souls influence by this point, but I mean, it really does here. Though, just because it is influenced by Dark Souls, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a carbon copy, and one of the mechanics that they're showing off here is that you can actually possess the dead in Mortal Shell and fight with their skills and weapons. This could change up the gameplay quite a lot, and I personally think it looks really promising so far. We don't have a release date just yet, but it will be coming to the Xbox One, PlayStation 4, and the PC, so I'll keep you updated on this one as we get more information. We also got an unfortunate update on The Last of Us Part 2 because Naughty Dog has confirmed that it will be delayed until further notice. This, of course, is one of the many delays here recently for the entire game industry, and with everything happening in the world right now, I do think we should come to understand this. As gamers, I think we need to show some maturity here and understand the gravity of the situation. With that said, the good news here is that Naughty Dog does note that they are almost finished with The Last of Us Part 2 and are just focusing on fixing some of the final bugs. This delay actually seems more geared towards finding a way to launch The Last of Us Part 2 rather than some kind of development issue or something like that, or at least that's how I read this message, but as always, when it does release, it'll more than likely be an amazing game. Naughty Dog is incredibly talented and I expect no less from them, so let's just be a little bit patient here. Now for the last quick topic before we dive into the Xbox interview, Chucklefish gave us a quick update on their newest game, Witchbrook, and wow, this game is really looking excellent so far. We can see both of what the old version of Witchbrook looked like in comparison into what it looks like now today. Of course, Chucklefish developed both Wargroove as well as Starbound, and that game in specific was a big success, so I think we did expect Witchbrook to look good, but I'm really liking the art style here a lot. When we first saw Witchbrook, it looked really good, but now it looks way better, and frankly, I like the premise of this game a lot. It sounds like a mix of Stardew Valley with something like Harry Potter, which I am a fan of Harry Potter, so I'm all good with that personally. In Witchbrook, you train to be a witch at school and all that kind of stuff, so yeah, I'm really hoping it's as good as it looks and sounds. With that said though, let's move on to the Xbox interview because there is a lot to go over here. I will try to make some of this as brief as I can, that way you can get the news as quick as possible, but yes, there is a lot of reading between the lines here with this interview, and we're going to start out with one that I'm not seeing a lot of people actually talk about. But Phil Spencer was asked about putting more Xbox games on the Nintendo Switch, and Phil Spencer's response was very interesting. He noted that some of the previous Xbox Nintendo Switch games were actually partner-led, meaning that games like Ori and the Blind Forest, which was developed by a third-party developer, Moon Studios, and not actually owned by Microsoft, was requested by Moon Studios. Not that Moon Studios could release their game without Microsoft's permission because Microsoft does own the Ori franchise, but it must have been something that Moon Studios wanted to do, and Microsoft simply allowed it and wanted to be a good partner instead of saying no. But then Phil Spencer seemed to change his tone a bit because he says he does not love the idea of rumors of Xbox games going to the Nintendo platform every time they talk about a game. He even talks about giving Xbox level expectations and what that exactly means. He did mention that he thought he already did that, and it's supposed to mean Xbox and PC, and even though he does have a ton of respect for Nintendo and what they do, he wants to set better expectations for Xbox fans going forward. So if you wanted more Xbox games on Nintendo, from what Phil Spencer says here, that is very unlikely to happen going forward, and it does seem to be because certain fans were taking it too far and maybe trying to spread rumors that were likely never true. So from this point forward, you should set your Xbox level expectations to mean Xbox and PC, so probably not much reason to speculate further on Nintendo Xbox games. And speaking of speculation, one game that has had a lot of speculation here recently has been Scalebound, as Platinum Games' Hideki Kamiya on multiple occasions has said he would like to go back and work on Scalebound once again, which has got a lot of people speculating on if maybe it could make a comeback. Sadly, Scalebound was cancelled years ago, of course, and Microsoft does own the IP, so it's not like Platinum Games can just go work on it. They have to first get permission from Microsoft, and they would have to work together once again, unless Platinum Games wanted to acquire the rights for Scalebound, and I don't think Microsoft would be willing to sell it to Platinum Games, so could they go back and work on it together? Well, Phil Spencer was asked about this, and Phil Spencer gave one of his only direct answers of the night and said they're not working on it. He was very humble about this and said it was a learning experience and that sadly they just didn't get there with Scalebound. And hey, I know that may be disappointing, and I wanted Scalebound as well, but it's just one of those things that's not going to happen, unfortunately. There are rumors as to why, but we're not going to speculate on all of that as of this moment. But for now, just know that Scalebound is not in development. Now let's move on to the topic of Xbox Series X versus the PlayStation 5, because Phil Spencer was asked about how he felt after he got public confirmation of the PlayStation 5 specs, and I think this was one of the most telling parts of this entire interview. See, Phil Spencer has a tendency of being very careful with his wording, and he doesn't really throw too many jabs at his competitors, but this is one of his more smug comments, and that I've seen him make personally, and I don't think he meant it to come off that way, but he says that he feels even better about the Xbox Series X and the decisions they made with it after seeing the PlayStation 5 specs, and he kind of expected it to be that way. Hence, the Series X is more powerful than the PlayStation 5, and he is even more confident about that after seeing the specs and hearing Cerny talk about it. And as we talked about on yesterday's episode of News Dose, this is very evident of the spec sheet of both consoles. The Series X has a better processor, it has a better video card, and really the list just goes on. And in fact, Phil Spencer seems highly confident about the Xbox Series X, and here's a quote from this interview. "We have a plan, and we feel really solid about our plan. We think it's a winning plan. I believe we have a plan that can win, and now we need to go execute." And there it is. And that isn't about just the power of the Xbox Series X, but it's also about the price of the Series X. He was asked about the price and release date, and while he gave no official confirmation on either, if you listen to his wording, it may give fans just a little bit of relief. What I mean by that is that he says they're staying agile about the price, and from what it sounds like, the Series X won't be a ridiculously absurd price. More so, it seems that maybe Phil Spencer has the go-ahead and make it a competitive price, and it may be as low as $500, and if that is the case, it may paint Sony into a tough spot because we already know that they're struggling with the PlayStation 5's price, as the PlayStation 5 currently costs $450 for parts. That's just the cost of the parts, not the retail price, so if the PlayStation 5 is also $500 at retail, that would be tough on Sony going against a more powerful console. Of course, we now see Sony's strategy here, and they're really going to try and emphasize the speed of their solid-state drive, but at the end of the day, the Series X is a more powerful console, and Sony knows that. This is the main reason they are taking that wait-and-see approach to how Microsoft prices the Series X. I imagine if the Series X is $500, which would more than likely be a loss per unit, I do think the Series X costs more than $500 to make. But let's just say, hypothetically say, that the Series X sells for $500. Well, then Sony may just have to take a loss on the PlayStation 5 and price it at $450 or even $400. Now, the thing about that is Microsoft, they're worth a lot more than Sony. They can take that loss, but Sony, on the other hand, they're not as big of a company as Microsoft, so taking a loss on one of their most profitable brands, that is a really tough loss. We'll see though in how that all works out, but we're just kind of theorizing as of this moment. Either way though, it does sound like the Series X will be at a competitive price. Now, as for the release date, the only thing I really have to say about that is that Phil Spencer is playing it by ear right now, and he is not going to jeopardize the health of his teams. Everything at the moment, it sounds as if the Series X will release this holiday, but with everything that is happening worldwide, you just can't say with 100% certainty. He did, however, note that they are absolutely looking for a simultaneous release worldwide, and he specifically mentions Japan here, and that they will not be doing what they did with the Xbox One. See, what happened with the Xbox One was that it was released in Japan like 9 months after the United States, and that really hurt them a lot in Japan, as Phil Spencer noted. So that will not be happening again, and that's really great news to hear. As for games, and this is the last topic, so don't worry, there are a few to note here though. One is that each studio has been working through the challenge of working at home, though no game delay would delay the Series X. However, he says he plans on having a big launch library, but wants to have a steady flow of games after the launch as well. That way games don't get overshadowed, which in my opinion is very smart. He even says that they have so many games in development right now that by the math they have to announce a new game or two at every convention that they go to, or else they wouldn't be able to talk about them all before they actually launch. That's a great problem to have and shows you that they mean serious business about their first party heading into next generation. That's something Xbox fans will love to hear, and from the sounds of it, they will be releasing new IP, some existing IP, and even some IP from dormant franchises. He was asked about the initiative in specific and if they're working on a reboot of something like possibly like Perfect Dark, and he kind of avoided the question here, but it does sound like Xbox has been thinking about some of their old existing IP at the very least. And speaking of first-party games, he even says that Xbox Publishing is working on several games right now. If you don't know what Xbox Publishing is, that is their studio that works with independent developers on exclusive games. Games like Killer Instinct, Ori and the Will of Wisps, you have Sunset Overdrive, Quantum Break, and yeah, there's a lot of games that is developed with Xbox Publishing, so I'm really curious to see who exactly they're working with right now. If you have any ideas, let me know in the comments below, or even who you would like to see Xbox work with. Let me know in the comments below. But yeah, that's about it. It was a pretty interesting interview, so I would highly recommend you go check it out. Phil Spencer always does a phenomenal job with his interviews, and I do just highly recommend you just go listen to it to hear everything that he has to say. But oh yeah, actually, I did forget one thing. Sea of Thieves has officially been announced to be coming to Steam, so that's pretty cool as well. Sea of Thieves is incredibly fun and has improved majorly since it first released, so go check that out if you haven't already. Anyways though, that's it for this episode. If you liked the video, don't forget to hit the bell notification and subscribe button for more content just like this. Peace out.